Welcome to The Explainer. So, you know those wild stories of lottery winners or celebrities who strike it unbelievably rich only to end up completely flat broke just a few years later? You've probably asked yourself, how on earth did they manage to lose it all? Well, today we are diving into a really fascinating paradox from our source material. We're going to explore the absolute dichotomy between building wealth and preserving wealth, and why making money and keeping money are, quite literally, completely different games. Okay, let's just shatter a really common assumption right out of the gate. What if the exact same skills that make you rich are the literal things that make you broke? I know, it seems completely counterintuitive, right? We naturally just assume that financial success is this single continuous skill set. Like, if you're good at making money, you must automatically be good at keeping it. But our sources reveal something pretty startling. The very traits that propel you to those massive financial heights can actually become the anchors that drag you right back down to zero. Getting rich and staying rich, they require fundamentally opposite skills. All right, section 1, getting versus staying rich, the ultimate paradox. To really wrap our heads around this paradox, we have to look at the massive difference between acquiring wealth and actually holding on to it. Think about it. Acquiring wealth almost always requires this intense cocktail of high energy. You need the blind optimism to believe a totally new venture is going to work even when the odds are stacked against you. You need a huge appetite for risk, the unshakable confidence to back yourself, and just relentless ambition. You literally have to put your foot firmly on the gas pedal. But the second you achieve that wealth, the rules of the game instantly flip. To stay rich, you have to slam on the brakes. You need restraint. You need skepticism. You have to swap out that risk-taking for caution and replace your ambition with ironclad discipline. You essentially have to transform into a completely different person financially, shifting entirely from offense to defense. Moving on to section 2, why smart people lose money, the complacency trap. So if the shift from offense to defense is that obvious, why do so many highly intelligent people still lose their shirts? Well, it all comes down to a really dangerous psychological shift, where success simply breeds complacency. Our source material maps out this very specific internal monologue that starts echoing in the minds of the newly successful, and it begins with one specific, incredibly dangerous thought. This success is permanent. You have a couple of great years, your investments totally pay off, a business scales up, and suddenly your brain tricks you into thinking you've crossed a permanent finish line. You start believing the current state is the forever state, completely ignoring the reality that markets change, industries shift, and honestly, plain dumb luck plays a massive role in almost every success story out there. And once you buy into that permanent success myth, overconfidence just naturally sneaks right in. You start thinking, hey, nothing can go wrong. That healthy skepticism we talked about a minute ago, it completely vanishes. You start making these wild, sweeping assumptions instead of careful calculations. You totally stop hedging your bets and protecting your downside because, well, why would you need to if everything you touch seemingly turns to gold? It's this intoxicating feeling of invincibility, but it completely blinds you to very real risks. Right on the heels of that invincibility comes lifestyle inflation, basically dressed up as entitlement. You tell yourself, I deserve every luxury. You know the feeling. You've worked hard. You took the crazy risks. You put in the late nights. So you convince yourself you've earned the right to outspend your actual growth. Suddenly that luxury sports car or the second vacation home, it feels like a basic necessity rather than an extravagant perk. The restraint and discipline you need to actually preserve your prosperity completely evaporate as your expenses rapidly rise to meet and very often blow right past your income. Which brings us to the ultimate delusion. This toxic belief entirely replaces the caution that you actually need to stay wealthy. The good times will continue automatically. Honestly, this is the silent killer of wealth. People rarely lose everything overnight in one giant dramatic explosion like you see in the movies. They lose it because this creeping complacency slowly, silently rots the floorboards of their financial foundation. They just stop paying attention. They stop managing risk. And they do this until a completely normal, everyday economic headwind comes along and just effortlessly knocks the whole house down. Let's get into section 3, the 3 wealth protectors, your financial guardians. How do we actually fight off this complacency? Well, our sources highlight 3 vital psychological guardians you need to protect what you've built. The first one, a little frugality. Now, notice the really important qualifier there, a little. Healthy frugality is not about extreme penny pinching or living in miserable deprivation. As the source elegantly puts it, healthy frugality simply says, just because I have the money to spend doesn't mean I actually should. It creates this super necessary buffer between your ego and your bank account, making sure your expanding lifestyle doesn't aggressively devour your hard-earned assets.
Guardian number 2 is a healthy dose of cynicism. Let's be real here. When you have money, you suddenly become a giant walking magnet for can't-miss opportunities and incredibly persuasive sales pitches. Healthy cynicism is basically your personal shield. It reminds us that not every shiny opportunity is real. It forces you to ask the hard questions, to relentlessly read the fine print, and to keep the fast-talking pitches, the overhyped crypto tips, and the fundamentally garbage investments totally at bay.
And the third guardian, which I know sounds a bit intense, is healthy paranoia, but it is absolutely crucial. Healthy paranoia focuses your mind entirely on protecting what took you years to build. It's that productive little voice in the back of your head asking, what if the market drops 30% tomorrow? What if my main source of income just dries up out of nowhere? It actively forces you to build an emergency fund, to properly diversify your assets, and to never, ever assume that the good times will just magically continue without your active participation.
But we have to be careful here. Section 4, the danger of extremes, when the antidote becomes poison. Because right when you think the secret to preserving your wealth is just to become a totally paranoid miser, our source throws up a massive warning sign. If you take these 3 protectors too far, the antidote literally becomes the poison. The boundary between vital self-protection and absolute self-sabotage is razor thin. For instance, too much frugality mutates into pure fear, totally robbing you of the ability to actually enjoy the life your wealth was supposed to provide in the first place. Too much cynicism curdles into this bitter distrust of everyone around you, alienating your friends and partners. And paranoia taken to the extreme, that just breeds paralyzing anxiety and isolation. You might technically keep your money, sure, but you'll entirely lose your peace of mind. So where does that leave us? Section 5, the ideal wealth mindset, finding the balance. How do we resolve all this tension? How do we find that sweet spot between the ambition required to build and the caution required to preserve? You need what the source calls the ideal mindset, a hybrid. You literally have to hold conflicting ideas in your head at the exact same time. You've got to remain optimistic enough to keep building and investing. You can't completely lose that spark and drive that got you there to begin with, but simultaneously, you have to be disciplined enough to preserve the gains you've already made. And perhaps the most vital trait of all, you must be incredibly humble, always remembering that catastrophic loss is possible. True humility is the ultimate hedge against the complacency trap. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want you to think about this simple, grounding truth from our source. The paths to initial wealth are practically endless. People get rich in real estate, in tech startups, in the stock market, by starting a local plumbing business, or sometimes just through sheer unadulterated luck. Getting wealthy has a million different instruction manuals, and trust me, the world is more than happy to sell you every single one of them. But actually keeping that wealth, that manual is surprisingly short. True financial survival isn't about constant, aggressive brilliance or hitting a home run every single time you step up to the plate. As this final thought perfectly summarizes, staying wealthy often comes down to just avoiding a few fatal mistakes repeatedly over decades. It's a lifelong game of defensive endurance. So, I'll leave you with this question to ponder today. Are you only training for the fast-paced sprint of getting rich, or are you actually equipping yourself with the restraint, discipline, and humility required to survive the decades-long marathon of staying wealthy?